At 70, life didn't end with a dramatic collapse. There was no single morning where I woke up and felt broken. Not the dramatic kind people talk about, but the quiet stamina that once carried me through ordinary days without effort. I told myself this was normal, that everyone slows down. And for a while, that explanation felt enough. Then came the loss of roles. Fewer decisions seemed to need my voice. None of this happened harshly. It happened gently, which somehow made it harder to name. The most unsettling part was not the physical change, or even the shrinking social circle. I stopped imagining future versions of myself. Days blended together, not because they were peaceful, but because they felt interchangeable. Time passed, but it no longer felt like it belonged to me. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. I was healthy enough. I lived independently. I smiled when expected. But inside, there was a growing sense of disconnection, as if I had stepped slightly out of my own life and was observing it from a distance. This kind of unraveling is difficult to explain, because it leaves no obvious marks. There is no clear grief, no single loss to point to. Friends my age joked about it, calling it slowing down or earning rest. But rest implies recovery. What I felt was not rest. The world had not become hostile, but it felt less welcoming, less shaped for someone like me. There is no alarm to warn you that something essential is slipping away. No one pulls you aside to say, "Be careful. You are losing your sense of self." By the time I realized I was falling apart, the pieces were not scattered on the floor. They were simply no longer connected. That is how it began for me. Not with pain, but with absence. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the window while washing dishes. There was nothing wrong with the face looking back at me, but it felt unfamiliar. Not older, just distant. I realized then that I had slowly stopped expecting anything from my days. I woke up, moved through routines, and went to bed without anticipation or resistance. There was no excitement, but there was also no protest. Sadness at least means you are still reacting. I wasn't reacting anymore. Take it easy now. You've earned rest. The truth is, I wasn't just slowing down physically. I was withdrawing emotionally. It's easier to step back than to risk realizing the world might not need you the way it once did. What made this period especially heavy was the belief that nothing could be done. Aging felt like a one-way path, and I thought my role was simply to adjust to the narrowing. I didn't feel depressed in the clinical sense. I felt resigned, and resignation can be mistaken for wisdom if you're not careful. There was also fear beneath it all. Fear of becoming a burden. Fear of failing physically. Fear of needing help and losing dignity. Those fears didn't shout, and because they whispered, they were easy to ignore. I stopped challenging my assumptions. I told myself I was being realistic, but in truth, I was protecting myself from disappointment. The turning point did not come from inspiration or advice. It came from discomfort, a deep, persistent sense that I was still here for a reason. They were brief, but they reminded me that the part of me that cared had not disappeared. And if it was a response, then perhaps it could be answered. The thing that saved my life did not arrive as a solution. It arrived as a shift so small that I almost dismissed it. There was no grand decision, no dramatic promise to change everything. For most of my life, responsibility meant other people. Family, work, obligations that pulled me forward whether I felt ready or not. By 70, many of those responsibilities had naturally loosened. Without something depending on me, my days felt optional. And over time, optional became empty. That morning, for where I placed it, how gently I treated myself. For me, it was the early morning. Sitting quietly does not look like progress. But over time, those moments began to gather weight. They reminded me that I still occupied my own life. I began noticing what lifted me, even slightly, and what drained me. This was the one thing that saved me. Reclaiming agency over my inner life. Not control over my body or my circumstances, but ownership of my attention and meaning. I stopped waiting for permission to care about my days. With that shift came movement. Not dramatic, not forced. I began walking again, not to improve anything, but to feel my place in the world. I began reading slowly, choosing words that challenged or comforted me instead of filling time. I reached out to one person, then another, not because I should, but because connection still mattered to me. The most important change was internal. I stopped measuring my life against what it used to be. I began asking a different question. What kind of life is possible now? That question does not demand youth. It does not require strength. It only asks for honesty. Age does not reverse itself because you find clarity. But the days no longer felt interchangeable. Each one carried texture again. Some were quiet, some heavy, some gentle. But they were mine. Looking back, I see that I hadn't fallen apart because I was 70. I had fallen apart because I had unconsciously stepped away from myself. The moment I stepped back in, even quietly, even imperfectly, life responded. That one thing did not give me more years. It gave me presence. Once I reclaimed my attention and sense of agency, I had to face a truth that was both uncomfortable and freeing. I began to notice how often I was saying yes out of habit and no out of fear. Yes to routines that no longer served me. No to experiences that felt unfamiliar. For years, I had told myself this was caution, even wisdom. But I began to see that some of it was simply withdrawal, disguised as prudence. The one thing that had saved me returning to myself now asked something in return. I started by listening more closely to my body, not as a limitation, but as a guide. I stopped pushing through fatigue to prove something to no one. I learned the difference between respecting my limits and hiding behind them. Activities became simpler, but more intentional. Pretending otherwise only delayed the pain. But when I allowed myself to mourn honestly, but growth simply changes direction. It turns inward, not with pity or concern, but with respect. Not the passive kind, but the patient attention that allows life to unfold without constant interference. I learned to let moments breathe. By 78, I could see clearly that what saved my life was not a habit or a routine. I was shaping the life I was still living. That distinction made all the difference. By the time I reached 78, I no longer thought of what happened at 70 as a collapse. I understood it as a turning. Life had asked me to stop running on old definitions of strength and success, and to listen more closely to what this stage was actually asking of me. The greatest lesson came quietly. Saving your life does not always mean adding something new. Letting go of those measures felt like defeat at first. In truth, from understanding that needing help does not erase a lifetime of competence, wisdom, or contribution. Not dramatically, not with complaint, but with clarity. I stopped asking my body to be what it was at 50. I stopped resenting its reminders. Instead, I treated it as a longtime companion that had carried me faithfully and deserved care, not criticism. This gentler relationship with myself reduced fear. And when fear lessens, life expands. I no longer rushed my days. I allowed space for slowness, for thought, for stillness. Not because I had nothing left to do, but because I finally understood the value of attention. These are not small things when you are fully present for them. If there is one truth I would pass on, it was the decision to stay engaged, to remain in relationship with my own experience instead of retreating from it. When you stop trying to prove yourself, you are free to know yourself. And that knowledge is steady. I wake up knowing why my day matters, not because of what I will accomplish, but because I will be present for it. That presence is what saved my life. And it continues to save it, quietly. And that, I have learned, is more than enough.